This is The Long Road to Publishing, the podcast where we hear from authors who have traveled a long and bumpy road to publishing their books. Whether you're just starting out on your own writing and publishing journey, or if you're all too aware of the many possible detours along the way, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Eva Langston, author, writing instructor, and creator of Eva's newsletter for writers on Substack. Thank you so much for coming along on the ride. This is a very special episode because it marks the 1-year anniversary of The Long Road to Publishing. Exactly 1 year ago, I released episode 1 with Courtney Mom, and now here we are at episode 35. So I just want to thank everyone for listening and continuing to listen. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy making it. My goal for year 2 is to keep putting out episodes from a wide variety of authors, different genres, different backgrounds, different publishing experiences. And my other goal is to find more listeners. I know there are a lot of writers out there who need to hear these stories, but they haven't found the podcast yet. So please do help me out by spreading the word both online and to your in-person writing communities. Today is actually my birthday, so that's something everyone can get me for my birthday. More listeners for my podcast. Today's episode is with Anne-Sophie Jouhanneau, who started out writing books for teens in French for a French publisher. She now writes in English and has had 4 novels published in the US, 2 YA rom-coms and 2 adult thrillers. In this episode, we talk about her experiences with book packagers, her 3 different literary agents, her love of screenwriting, and so much more. Also in this episode, I mentioned that I spent some time a long time ago working as a background extra for TV and film. So FYI, I recently posted a picture on Instagram from one of my background extra jobs. So if you're curious, I will put a link to that in the show notes. You can see me right behind 2 very famous actors. Anyway, back to Anne-Sophie. I always love when an author's publishing story makes me gasp out loud, and hers definitely did that at least once, if not more. Her publishing journey is so long and so twisty. Let's not delay any longer getting into it. I am calling this episode her 20th book, but it felt like her first. Anne-Sophie Jouhanneau is a French-American author who has previously published novels and nonfiction books for teens, which have been translated into over 12 languages. She now writes in multiple genres for adults. Her recent releases include thrillers The French Honeymoon and We Would Never Tell. She lives in New York City with her French, Australian, American family, 2 gorgeous cats, and a whole lot of passports. So welcome, Anne-Sophie, to The Long Road to Publishing.
Thank you so much for having me, Eva. I appreciate being here.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you because I just recently read We Would Never Tell. I thought it was so much fun. Before I gush more about it, do you want to give a quick elevator pitch to tell what it's about?
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you for reading it and for your kind words. So We Would Never Tell is a murder mystery suspense novel. It features 3 young women who are at the bottom of the Hollywood ladder, who arrive at the Cannes Film Festival with big dreams of finally having their break in Hollywood. But by the time the festival is over, they find themselves entangled in a murder and the theft of a multi-million-dollar necklace.
Oh,
And that's
yes.
my quick pitch for it. I'll let people discover more. There's a lot more to it, obviously.
Do you have any experience in like the Hollywood or film world?
I do know.
Oh, I'm very impressed that because I really felt like I was getting kind of like the insider look, and yeah, that was a lot of fun. So I spent a year in LA working as a background extra, which is
Oh,
like bottom of the barrel. And so it is really interesting because you're like very close to these huge stars and you're seeing all of the glitz and the glamour, but you are like down at the bottom. So I thought that was a really unique take on that world. And I will also say that I thought you did such a good job with ending your chapters with like little mini cliffhangers that I really couldn't stop reading.
thank you. I think I appreciate you saying that. It's something I try to do for most chapters. It doesn't always work, but I love contrast in general, and that's why I always, if there's one thing that I explore in most novels, it's that. And I think for me, with the overall, topic of the novel, it was the super glitz glamorous world, but we are following the people who are at the very bottom of the ladder, like the nobodies.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just, very interesting to see like the proximity to such fame and wealth and glamour and to not have it for yourself. And I feel the same about chapters. It's you take your reader down like a path with that story within the chapter, and by then you're like, oh well, like we switched again,
Yeah.
like, it's just a way like how do you turn the story just slightly, or the last two or three lines just enough that people are like, wait, what is going on? Like I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it of like the contrast because I'm just thinking of like one example of one of your chapters where, the character is like, okay, this is going to be the biggest, most amazing night of my life. And then like the last line is like, and it turned out not to be that way at all, or, something. And so then you're like, oh, okay, well, what's going to happen? So yeah, that like contrast at the very end that keeps people turning pages.
I think with thrillers, it's so much about, people talk about twists like it's the end all be all, but there's a lot of misdirection. But it's like, oh, you think this is like the best night of her life, but it's not. Or
Right.
you think, this is happened. You think she's like the good girl, nice girl who has this awesome boyfriend and she has this great job, but actually she's a liar and a cheater. Like I like to think it less in terms of like the big twist and more in terms of how do you misdirect people and just keep the reader on their toes at all times.
Yeah, I know I like that because sometimes it's like, oh gosh, how am I going to come up with some mind-blowing twist? But you're right, it's more just like make the reader think one thing and then
Yeah.
have it be something else. It's yeah. Well, so anyway, so here you are now. We would never tell just came out in April, but I know you have written many Substacks on your, I think you call it your bonkers publishing journey, like
Right.
part one, part two, part three. I don't know how many parts there are, but we're going to try to get through this whole saga today because I know it's been a wild ride. I want to kind of go all the way back in time. Did you always want to be a writer? And then the second part of that question is like, when did you decide that you were going to get serious about writing?
Yeah. So I don't think I think I was a writer. It wasn't so much like I want to be. It was so I grew up deep country, no libraries, we had a bookshelf full of books, but I don't think there were many new books around, like we weren't really in that headspace. I hear a lot, I'm saying this because when I listen to interviews by other authors, they often talk about the trips to the libraries and how many books they were given, and I didn't have that. So I grew up inside a school. My dad was a primary school teacher, like the principal of a primary school. And when I was about 8 years old, the school acquired a computer, which a desktop computer, which I'm going to age myself a lot here, but it was kind of a really big deal because we knew about computers, we didn't really know what they did or how to use them. And I snuck into the classroom at night and I turned it on. And the only thing I could think of to do with it was to open the word processor. I don't think it was Microsoft Word. Like it was the most basic thing ever. And I just typed things. And I didn't know about saving things. And so every day I would just close the thing and not say, and it's fine, like we don't need to keep, I feel like these days we keep everything, every photo we've ever taken, but that's what I did. I would go in there and type my little stories. So in that sense, I was always a writer. Later on, I worked as a freelance journalist. I had a blog for many years. I always found my way to like, there was always a way to write something. I didn't really know what to make of it.
Yeah.
I did not grow up in an environment where, writer was a job or like journalist was a job, but like writer, novelist, that was not a job. That was not like a career to pursue. That wasn't something that was going to pay any kind of bills. So I was living in Australia at the time, it was 2009, and I had a friend who worked for a publishing house in France. And she had dropped my name a few times because at the time I was writing this anonymous fashion blog and it wasn't huge or anything, but it was, it was read. It got a decent amount of visitors and some people knew about it. Like it's so weird, because it's the same when you're a novelist. If you're not like huge, but you have a little bit of success, it's very hard to explain what that looks like.
Right. Yeah.
And my friend had mentioned me to an editor there who deemed me not, not worthy of her attention, let's put it this way. And she reached out to another fashion blogger to write a book, A Guide to Fashion for Teenage Girls. And the other blogger turned the project down. And then the editor finally was like, oh, fine, I'll give that girl, like me, like a shot, like whatever. Like, going down the list.
Right.
A lot of people think of publishing as like a prestigious thing. You're going to write this amazing novel and it's going to get picked up by an amazing publisher and you're going to have the most wonderful publishing experience. But sometimes we just pick up other people's crumbs, other people's like leftovers, and it's good enough.
Yeah, got you in the door. Yeah.
Exactly. And I wrote sample pages. I had 2 days to do them. Then they gave me the job because there was no one else. Honestly, like let's just be real here. I worked very, very hard to write as well as possible. And then when I got given the contract, I had 2 months to write the book. It was nonfiction, shorter. There was illustrations, and I had a full-time job in advertising, and I just did it in every bit of spare time I had. And by the end of it, I was so hooked. I had always thought I would write a book one day, but I didn't even think, would it be a novel? Would it just felt like at some point I would eventually get around to writing a book. And that forced me to write a book in 2 months. And by the time it was done, I thought, okay, I need to do a lot more of this. So I went to my editor and said, what else have you got?
Oh, that's cool. So two things, going back to, not feeling like writing books is a viable career option. I definitely remember being, a kid, a teenager, and telling people, "Oh, I like writing." And they'd be like, "You should be a journalist." It was like that was what, if you like to write, be a journalist. And I was like, "But I don't want to write true stories." Like, no, no. But yeah, I didn't think writing novels, and to be fair, probably not a viable career option.
No, I was going to
So,
say, and sadly, journalist is becoming, much less and less a
yeah,
viable career as well. I think it's very hard when you're a working novelist to explain to people that on one hand, it is not a viable career in the sense that, you're not going to get health insurance, you're going to have zero security. If you have any dependents or any responsibilities as an adult, it's going to be very, very challenging. But you can make money and publish and be a professional writer. And yes, some people do make good money doing that. It's
yeah,
just it's not a job where you just go through the motion and get promoted and promoted, and I
right.
think that's very hard to explain that.
All right. Well, so you're writing these like nonfiction books for teens, Fashion Guide and others. And so were they kind of giving you like an outline? Like how much of it was your own ideas and how much of it was them telling you what to write?
It was part of a series of nonfiction, right? So they had like guides to fashion, beauty, friendship, and you get given a page count, and it was very much like on page 2 and 3, it's going to be this, on page 4 and 5, it's going to be this. Those were pretty set in stone, I would say. The one series I did that was very popular was quizzes, like the kind of quizzes you had in magazines.
Oh yeah.
So we did books of those, and those were very much more open. We had a format for the quizzes, like multiple choice, like 10 questions, you choose between three options. But the topics were it was always the same. It was always like teen girls kind of topics, right? So fashion, beauty, schools, friendship, boys, that sort of stuff. And then I would choose 5 topics within each like theme, I guess.
Category. Yeah.
So I did come up with all the ideas for that, but it was still within a set format. And as time went on, I pitched them things. So at some point they wanted to do another quiz book, and I had done like 4 already, and they sold really well, and so everyone, was happy. But I thought, how many more of this can I do? Would you rather be a shoe or a handbag? It was
Yeah.
like that sort of thing. And so I pitched them with different formats, and they went with that, and so yeah, but it was pretty prescriptive, I would say.
Yeah.
I was getting paid to write books. I didn't at the time. It was more than, I was in my mid to late 20s, and it was way more than I could expect. So
And I guess as kind of like a day job, it's pretty fun. If you were talking, it was reminding me, I've never mentioned this on the podcast, but for like 3.5 years, I wrote math curriculum because I used to be a high school math teacher. And it would be similar where they'd be like, okay, we want, a week's worth of curriculum for these skills centered around a theme. And so I would come up with some theme like ice cream shop or, hopscotch or designing a building or I don't know. And then I would come up with all these worksheets and curriculum and everything. And it got to where, and they just kept giving me more and more. And it got to where, like 3.5 years in, I'm like, I can't think of any other theme that goes with decimal division. Like, I just can't do it. So I feel like you're like, oh my gosh, another, like you're getting paid for it, but you're like, another quiz about fashion. I just don't know.
Oh, yeah.
So
And I will say, I think my regret, so I learned, my editor was absolutely fantastic. I worked with a few within the publisher, but there was one who I worked with more than the others. And I really, really loved her. And I learned so much about writing from her. And I think my big takeaway from that period of my life is I got paid to learn to write. I am not professionally trained in writing. Did not do an MFA. I'm not even a native English speaker. But I think I got to get paid to really get crash courses from absolutely amazing editors. And this has been a theme throughout my career. And I feel like that I don't think I appreciated what a privilege it was at the time because I wasn't being paid very well. It wasn't prestigious work because the advances were fairly low. I did earn out on many of them. So for years, I earned royalties on these books. So not prestigious work, but I think people sometimes don't realize that they are really, truly fantastic editors working at the not necessarily the most prestigious literary imprints. They're really brilliant people everywhere. And this was a more commercial publisher of, teen and children's books. But when you find someone who really can explain to you why and how and the mechanics of storytelling, I think that's pretty, at least it was very valuable to me.
yeah. Were you writing at the time in French?
Yeah, those books were in French. A lot of them were translated in many languages, but no English. So I have not, this is a question that comes often. All the books I wrote in French were not published in English. And so far, all the books I've written in English have not been translated to French. I hope this will change one day, but there is no overlap.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's kind of like two separate parts of, but both my French books and my English books have been translated in many languages, just not each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting. At what point were you thinking, okay, maybe I want to branch out? Or I don't know, I know at a certain point you wrote a novel. Can you tell me how you got to that point?
I found out through my friend that that publisher was mostly doing nonfiction at the time, and they had done one young adult novel series with a fairly established author that had done very well and had sold many copies. And then we're looking at launching another fiction series. And they were not considering me at all because I had not written fiction. I had not published fiction for sure. They had, once again, someone more prestigious and more established in mind. And I basically knocked on the door, like, I heard you doing this. Can you put me on the list? And they were like, yeah, yeah. I let them, I'll write sample pages, they gave me the idea. This was a very vague, like 3-line concept that they had in mind. They had like a book they wanted, like a com title and a very vague concept. So I wrote like a chapter or two, worked very hard on it. And turned out they gave me the project, but it turned out that the other person they wanted had dropped out. So I
Uh,
was competing against myself. And that ended up, so that was my first novel officially, like the first novel I ever wrote, the first novel I published, and it ended up being a 5-book series.
oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and what people, I feel like that is a very common thing about series where you only get confirmed that there's going to be a book 2, 3, 4, whatever when you finish the book. So you kind of have to like write it as a standalone novel that has a bit of a cliffhanger that is open to other storylines, but you don't know for sure as you finish it that there will be another one. So I ended up writing these 5 books over the course of 4 years, I think.
Wow. You'd written all these nonfiction books, but then what was it like writing your first novel? How did that go?
I mean, they were very patient with me for book one. I struggled. I think I struggled with focus, with it's such a mountainous task, like it is such a large project. It is also a thing. I feel like with novels, they don't it can be very challenging to know which way do I pick up this thing. I don't know,
Mm,
I don't know how do you write a chapter? How do you write a scene? What's the story? What are the characters? Where is it going? Like there's just so many elements to work out. You don't know which order you should work them out in. You don't know there's also no specific way to do it, for all the like method books, and I love them. I have Save the Cat, I read it often, I have all of those books. Now I do, I didn't back then. But still, it's its own, I don't, intangible thing. I feel
yeah.
like until it's like a physical printed book, and it can be so hard to know, like, I don't even know which way to attack this thing.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, it was just a lot of procrastination, a lot of staring at the screen and choosing to browse the internet instead because that was easier. And then, as I often do, I let many months pass, and my editor panicked a little bit. And she was very nice about it, but I think there were moments where she was like, "Hello, what's happening?" I'm like, "Not a whole lot." And at the end, they were like, "We really want to publish this book on this date." And I wrote the vast majority of it in the space of a few weeks while I was moving, while I was, it's often like that with me. It's when there's like big personal things going on where those things coincide with the biggest deadlines, and then I cram in, there were days where I felt like I just wouldn't look up from the screen for like almost 8 hours. I mean, I still, ate and whatever, drank water, but I just get there's a moment the panic really sets in, and I'm less like that now. I'm a little bit more organized, but I really crammed in this whole book in the last few weeks before I had like a year to write it, but it was way too long. We chopped it up. She told me what to cut, and she was like, "This is how many words we're gonna need to cut." So like, go for it. And yeah, it was not a beautiful, creative, wonderful process. It was just mostly chaos and panic. But that's sort of my brand, to be honest.
Well, I love that, like, I love the confidence and the bravery of you, putting yourself, being like, I can do it. I will do this novel. And then being like, oh my gosh, okay, they said yes. Now how the heck do I do this? But I feel like sometimes we kind of have to trick ourselves. This is why I'm always telling people like who say, oh, I want to write a novel. I'm like, tell everyone you're writing a novel and tell them you're finishing it by this date. And like, or like I told everyone I was starting this podcast. And then I was like, okay, now I have to actually figure out like how to audio edit and how to like what's a hosting site. And you like if you say you're going to do it and then you kind of have to force yourself to actually do it. So
And that's what I really love. So these books were IP projects, right? The IP is with the copyright is with the publisher. But I really, I have to say, even all these years later, having written and published many novels now, I don't know that I would have done it, if I hadn't forced myself into it. I meet, and I'm sure you do as well, I meet a lot of people who want to write a novel, and I sympathize because it is very, very, very hard. Especially when you haven't done it before, when you haven't been, you don't really know the mechanics of it, like how publishing works or how writing a full book works. And it's so, at least to me, so daunting. And I think I wanted it, but I wanted to do it, but I would have found so many ways to distract myself from it. And again, like having the opportunity to have a contract, to have a book deal, again, small advance, which is way more common in France. It's a smaller market anyway. We don't have the kind of advances that, people have in the US, or the range that it can go up to. And yeah, I was forced into it. And I knew it was going to be published. I knew I had an editor who was going to help me make it better or get it ready for publication. It was really an amazing thing to have. That book series did extremely well. I still found it in bookstores 10 years later.
well, and it showed you that you could write novels.
Yes,
I'm sure that helped you, like helped fortify you as you started to branch out and do your own things.
exactly. And so, for a little bit of context, as I was finishing this book, I was moving from Australia to New York. So I wrote a lot of it in trains, planes, automobiles while I was going from Melbourne to New York, because I took a 6 week trip to get here basically, and say here because I moved to New York in 2011 with the plan of staying 2 to 3 years, and I am still here. Almost 15 years later. And yeah, and so by the time I got here, I was under contract. So I was finishing the first novel. I was going to do, there was a good chance there were going to be a second. I was still doing those nonfiction books for my French publisher. And then quickly when I got here, I'm maybe skipping ahead a little bit, but I realized, okay, so there's a big publishing market in the US. It doesn't translate. Like the work I've done in France is great for, well, I wasn't in France, but with my French publisher, it's great for practice. It was great for learning, but I can't bring this work here. It doesn't really help me build a career here. I have to start from scratch again. And I quickly decided that's what I wanted to do.
Then you were like, okay, I'm gonna try writing my own novels in English.
Yep.
And here I am in New York City, so I'll try to get them published.
So when I got here, like I said, I was under contract for both novels and nonfiction books. I had a few sort of I always had like two or three lined up, which I know sounds like a lot, but those nonfiction books, they took 2 to 3 months to write. It wasn't too crazy. And I found a place called the Gotham Writers Workshop, like a writing school in New York City. And I read the description for screenwriting and TV writing, and I thought, oh, that sounds very interesting. Just more as this is a different type of writing. At the time, I certainly didn't feel like I could ever, not ever, but that I didn't feel like I had me to write a novel in English, especially by myself. I hadn't done it yet. And I thought, let's have a look at this TV writing course. I signed up for it and I really fell in love with it. I love the format. I had a really great instructor. I'm very much and I think a lot of novelists are like that, but I really see the movie in my head as I write. So it felt very natural. I learned the format, it's a completely different format to write screenwriting, and I thought it was just going to be a little bit of an exercise, like just to see. And the second half of the course, we had to come up with write our own TV pilot and come up with a concept. And I came up with a concept, and my instructor found it very commercial and felt like it had a lot of potential. And I wrote the whole pilot. By the end of the course, he said, I really think this is potential. Shop it around. Definitely go around and shop it. And I thought, all right, well, obviously I had no idea how to do that. And I entered a few competitions. There was one competition, it's in Austin, it's called Austin. So there's an Austin Film Festival, but there's a screenwriting conference attached to it that has a competition that you can enter in different categories. So I entered a few of these, like that one and other competitions in a row, like several years in a row, because I was rewriting this one a lot. I was writing my French novels. I was working on other things, but there wasn't a lot of time. Like I was very attached to this particular idea, so I kept rewriting it. And I reached the second round of that competition 2 or 3 years in a row, I think. So at the time, I think it's changed now, but at the time it was like the top 10%, which felt pretty decent. And the third year I entered it, I got an email out of the blue from a TV manager in LA. So the equivalent of like an agent, basically. And he said, Little Bird told me that this script is amazing. Can you send it to me right now? And it was still in the competition. And I said, okay. So what is going on? I don't know. And days later, he wanted to set up a call and wanted to sign me. And it turned out that one of his clients, another screenwriter, was a reader for the competition and had read the script. And now she and I became friends since, but she had read the script, thought it was really good, said to her manager, you will love this. This is going to keep, going in the competition. Get her now, basically. I mean, she didn't tell him what to do, but she was like, this is going to be announced that this is going to be a set. So the script ended up being a semi-finalist that year. So I didn't make it past that, but by the time it was a semi-finalist, I had a TV manager and he wanted to shop that around. And I thought, oh, wow. And as many people who've dealt with Hollywood people will tell you, there's a lot of, this is going to be huge. This is going to sell for a lot of money. Get ready for your big break.
Before I ask you where this is all leading to, when somebody says, "Oh, this is a great pilot" or "This is great screenplay," shop it around. You're right. I don't know, like, what does that mean? I know all about the querying literary agents process. Besides entering competitions, how else do you quote unquote shop it around?
So the way it worked, and this information is a little old, but I did talk to a friend recently who went through this process, and it's fairly similar. there is a very similar process to query film and TV agents, managers. A lot of people have managers and agents. I've been told now are more for actors and not like
Okay.
writers tend to have a manager and a lawyer. Again, it varies. So the difference is most film TV people don't have a website where they explain this is how you submit your query. So you have to really do the digging. You have to find and again, like most novelists have a website where they list who their agent is. It's not necessarily the same for screenwriters, and it's much harder to find out about working screenwriters because a lot of them haven't had something made yet. So they
Hmm.
will get paid for their work, be working screenwriters, and still not necessarily have a quote unquote public presence, right? I mean, obviously, what I'm describing is before social media, so now it's a little bit different. But even then, I find like you could look up some of the biggest screenwriters out there and you won't find that much on them. You do your best digging to find, and they are websites, they are resources, it's just slightly more opaque than
Mm.
publishing, as we know, is opaque. This is way more opaque, in my opinion. But you can send queries out. I'm told that it's if you don't have a referral, it's the longest possible shot. Whereas
Yeah.
I don't agree. We'll get to this, but I got my current agent, my literary agent through the slush pile, and I think people get picked up from the slush pile every single day. I know it gets a bad rap. I get why, but the slush pile really works in publishing, less so in the screenwriting world.
Yeah.
So you can enter there's competitions. There's sending queries into into
Into the
the void.
void. Yeah.
I mean, this is really
Yeah.
all you can do is try to get your work out there and hope somewhere at some point bites. You just really don't know. So
Yeah.
I think for me, I found for the first 2, 3 years, I found the idea of just entering competitions, which is kind of a safe thing because there's a website and you have to pay to enter, but this is the deadline. They accept it's this many pages. It has to be formatted this way and that. And I felt like, okay, this is something clear. I'm being given clear instructions on how to potentially get my work out there. So I do like them. I know I don't love the idea that you have to pay to submit your work, but it was a way to know what to do with that script that I'd been told had potential, and yet I didn't really know what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so first of all, you do have a little background in Hollywood. Back to We
Oh,
Would Never
I
Tell.
mean, as you will soon find out, it ended very quickly, but yes.
So yeah, so then what happened? You got the TV manager, and was this manager saying, "I'm going to represent you as a screenwriter," or just this one script?
No, I think the idea was we were going to submit this. He was going to submit this to film production companies. Also, submit me as a potential writer for its writer's room.
Mm,
So that's the other way you work as a screenwriter is you can submit that as a sample of your writing and get hired to write on a show. A lot of shows have writer's room. 5 people, it can be 10, 12. Back in the more like classic sitcom days, it could be a much larger room. So yeah, and then it's like, and what all agents and managers, everyone will tell you is go write more things, as if you just click your fingers, like write the next book, write the next script. It's always like that, and they all make it sound so easy, and as we know, it's not necessarily. So while he shopped it around, I wrote more things, and then we didn't get interest. Basically, I did a few calls with Amazon Studios at the time was very, very new. I did a couple calls with a couple people like that, and then nothing much happened. And then I wrote we submitted me to write on a show that didn't happen. I pitched them, the Amazon people at the time were interested in a younger audience, so like more like mine were like 16 and up, right? So, and they were looking for more shows between like the 12, like 10, 14 age group. I pitched them some ideas and they were like, okay, we're interesting, but and then one of them I liked enough that I wrote the whole script. Again, I sent that, nothing happened. And I think at some point along, what's happened to me several times is just seeing the people on the other side lose their interest, when you're not like writing amazing script after amazing script. And I feel like in hindsight, I realize now that it wasn't just my fault that it didn't sell, like at some point, could they have sent it to more places? Could they have who knows? And I'm not saying this to assign blame. It's more, it's very easy for writers to blame themselves for something not happening, but our agents are also responsible for selling our work, and sometimes they can't get it done, and just like sometimes we can't get write a better novel. Everyone has their, their flaws. And I found, so at the time I was watching closely things, Gossip Girl had been out for a while, Pretty Liars was really big, and I knew this company who I knew those shows were coming from this company called Alloy Entertainment, which is part of Warner Brothers. And I knew they originated as books. And
Hmm.
I thought, in my extremely naive state, I thought, well, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to write this as a novel, this idea that I love, that everyone is telling me it has great commercial potential. In the meantime, I broke it off with my TV manager. I just felt like the interest was sort of waning, let's put it
Yeah.
this way. And then I got connected with someone from MTV who loved the idea, shopped it around. We worked on it together for many months first, and then they shopped it around. Nothing happened. And I thought, I'm going to write the novel. I'm going to sell it as a novel, and then I'm going to be the showrunner on the TV show. Again,
Yeah.
like I love that for me, but
I
I
love
love,
the confidence.
yeah, I love the complete delusion that I operated from at the time. But I will say, I think it served me well to just be completely delusional and just be like, I'm just going to have a TV show made from my own book. And so I wrote the novel.
And was this novel like a YA?
It was, yeah. At the time, that's what I'd done. I knew YA. I felt like that was my lane. I felt like I'd spent years and years studying teen psychology, spending time on teen forums, trying to see what they think about and how they talk and all of that. And I felt like it was very much my lane. And I wrote this novel by the time I really sat down to write it, by the time I finished it and started querying, it was about 2 years. At some point along the way, around that time, I stopped working with my French publisher. At the time, by then, I'd written altogether about 17 books for them, including the 5 novels.
Oh, wow.
And I'd learned everything I could learn. But anyway, so I read this novel and I'm getting very close to querying agents. And so by now we're in 2017. And I always in the back of my mind, thought about that company, that IP company that does all these very commercial YA novels. And around the same time, I met an author who writes for them. And I told her that I did the same sort of work with my French publisher, right? Where they gave me ideas and I wrote the books for them. And she put me in touch with her editor there. And the editor had an idea for a book that was set in Paris, set in the ballet world. And was like, oh, you would be perfect for this. They weren't particularly, they developed their own concept. So my own novel, I felt like, okay, I'm going to find an agent for my own novel and then pursue this thing with them. And then it was a long shot. I wrote sample pages. They told me they really liked them. I wrote sample pages for another project first. They really liked them, but said they didn't want to pursue that project. But they said, we really want you for the Paris Ballet book. Got myself an agent with my own book.
You had your own YA novel, and then you also were like, okay, I'm going to work with this IP. And would you call this like a book packaging company? Is that the
Book packaging is the right way, yeah.
okay? And they want me to do this Paris, even though I'm guessing, you're not from Paris. I'm not sure your history with ballet.
I
But
have no history with ballet. I grew up just outside Paris.
oh, okay.
So I spent enough time there. I grew up like 40 minutes out, but in the country. People love to put you in a box in general. It's just human nature. And to this day, people think of me for, I'm the European girl,
Yeah.
which I am. People come to me with these kinds of projects. I am the natural. On one hand, I'm like, well, there's a lot more to me than where I come from. But I understand it was a bit of a coincidence that those two things happened at the same time. That I was ready to query my own work based on my own screenplay at the same time as I connected with that editor. So yeah, a book packaging company, they call this type of work by different terms. People say work for hire, developmental work, IP projects. I don't love work for hire because for me it's not a clear cut, we hire you to write this. It's a very collaborative process, at least it's
Hmm.
been my experience. By the time you're done, it's impossible to know whose idea was what. You write all of the words, right? The writer is the one at the keyboard doing all of the writing. but the ideas and the plot, it's a very collaborative process. A lot comes from them. You add a lot yourself. You play around with it as you're writing. So
I remember looking into, or I probably even applied for a position at a book packaging company like a long time ago. And it was because I felt like I had come out of my MFA program, like being like, I can write a darn good sentence, but I have no idea how to write a novel. And it felt very much like, oh, here's somebody who will like give me an idea, kind of give me a loose outline, like help me with the actual structure of the story, and I just get to write the words. So it was very appealing to me. Clearly I didn't get the job. I don't remember what happened, but clearly I didn't get it. But I can see how it's still a creative process. Like you said, your collaborative creative process.
it's very collaborative. It is definitely a creative process. And I think it's interesting that you touch on that because so I did not do an MFA. A lot of people I know who have done MFAs sort of mention the same thing where they learn to critique work very well, they learn to analyze work, they learn to write beautiful sentences. Sometimes wonder, would I enjoy an MFA? And I think I got my MFA by working with these book packages. I
Yeah.
work, working with Alloy was like the best MFA. Again, I got paid to do an MFA with them because they are brilliant storytellers. They do this in and out all day long for 30 different books at once. They've had huge successes. Now, mind you, just because they're amazing at outlining and plotting and commercial concepts, they still have plenty of books that don't do very well. There is no guarantee of anything at any time. But I sign on with them at the same time as I sign on. So I queried to get an agent for my YA. And at the same time, I said, when I signed with an agent, I said, I think I'm going to do this IP work. Would you negotiate my contract as well while we sell my own novel? And that IP project took 2 years to get off the ground.
Oh, wow.
2 years of working on a 75-page partial. It was when I say it was an MFA, it was like that's how long it took. Like it was writing and rewriting and replotting, and it was meetings of 8 hours in the office, plotting the entire, first the first, 75 pages. Then we did it again for the whole book. It was very intensive writing course.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And what was the name of this one?
Kisses and croissants.
Oh, I
It's
see it behind you. I was guessing, but
yeah.
I didn't want to assume.
No,
So,
no, of course, yeah,
okay.
that's the one. So my own YA novel didn't sell, and as you know, a lot of people go through this. That my agent felt very strongly that it was the same idea that everyone had found the potential in it, and everyone had thought it could really do something in YA, at least at the time, and it has changed for sure. There's just fewer, I mean, there's even fewer now, but there's just fewer imprints, fewer editors. At some point you hit the wall. I feel like in adult, there's a lot of publishing models. You have the big five, you have smaller presses, you have Amazon imprints that do really well. You have digital first options with YA after we'd sent it at the time, I think probably to 22, 23 editors, you know, and my agent said, "Do you want to rewrite it?" And at the time, I had written that book so much, and it had been written as a pilot for years. And I said, "It's not that I don't want to; it's just I don't know what to do with it. I'm so tired of it. I'm so
Yeah.
tired of getting almost there with it." And it just didn't sell. It was devastating. It was
Oh,
really, really, absolutely heart-wrenching. I will say now I know, I understand how it works now, but at the time I had had so many people believing in the story and so many, it just really felt like if I just keep going, of course it
yeah.
will happen. There was no way it was not going to happen because I had gotten so close. And I think that's what can be very devastating for writers is you can get an amazing agent. You can get editors who are like, I love this so much, but it's not quite working, or the writing is beautiful, but and if it's a no, it's a no.
And I'm sure it's like it's the crazy making thing of like, but this, won an award and people keep telling me how good it is and I got me a TV manager and it still doesn't sell. And you're like, "What? Brain is exploding." But that's the publishing industry.
It is, and I think if you now that I've been in a long time, I think I take it way less. I mean, I still take it personally, but way less so because it's the right person at the right time with the right project. I honestly believe sometimes you would send a book out 2 months later or 2 months earlier, you get a different response from them same editor because sometimes they've just bought a book 2 weeks ago that it doesn't have to be similar to yours. They just, for some reason, are not feeling yours as much. Or 2 days ago, they had lunch with someone who said, "Ooh, this kind of book doesn't sell anymore," and that clouds their judgment. They are people like the rest of us,
Yeah.
but ultimately they have to feel it, and some days they just don't. And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how good your book is. I mean, I think a truly great book we usually find a way. But sometimes I had rejection letters that were the most incredible rejection letters. And it's like I got so close to a yes, and it is still a no.
Well, and who knows? Because I feel like on this podcast, so many times I talk to people and they're like, and I thought this book, was going nowhere. And like 10 years later, I get a new editor and then they're like, show me your old things. And, so you
That's
never
true.
know. You never know.
I have not reopened that file in a very long time. It's one of these projects where I had so much heartbreak over it.
Yeah.
You never know. I don't see myself revisiting it, but I do for a very long time. I stayed away from the topics I explored in this book, and then I thought, wait, no, I've never published that book. I can use whatever I want for. I mean, I don't not like scenes or whatever, but just like the world it was set in, and
Yeah. So then in the meantime, so while, you're on submission with this YA novel that doesn't sell, but then you are still working on these two YA like
just
rom-coms.
one, just
Oh,
yeah,
just the one, just the one. Okay,
yeah,
Kisses and Croissants. Okay.
yeah.
And so, yeah, so I guess where did you go from there? Did you keep working with that book packager? Did you decide to try again with another novel on your own?
So the 2 years that I spent on Kisses with the packager, there were a lot of very long breaks, right? Like I would write the 75 pages, send it in, wait weeks and weeks and weeks for feedback, then do another round, then do another round. That went on for many, many months. My own novel was kind of dead. Like I think it was early 2018. And then I was like getting back in there. I had the Kisses and Croissants. I had no idea if it would ever come to be something. I kept doing the revisions they kept asking me to do and then waited for months. So I started working on a new book. When I sent it to my agent, well, I sent like a few pages, like 20 pages, whatever, an outline, and she liked them. And then she said, no, I don't think this is going to sell. And I spent months working on that, like just really, polishing those pages, polishing an outline and all that. And she just said, no, I don't see an editor buying this. No.
Oh,
And I know it was very, very hard. I think I've gotten a lot better at coming up with concepts and developing them. That doesn't mean they always work or anything like that, but I think at the time I just felt months expended it to try to create this world. And I didn't have a ton of pages written, but I had a plan to finish the whole novel. Just like, nah. And yeah, and I think I thought, okay, well, I really don't know what to do anymore. That the concept of that novel I still really like and think about a lot. And I've seen a few books done on
mm,
that with that sort of trope or whatever. I don't even know what to call it. And around that time, I thought, well, I'm kind of tired of writing YA and tired of writing YA because I've done this because I thought that was what I knew how to do. But it's not working. I'm not selling those books. So what does it matter anyway? And I think what I came away with is if I'm going to fail at something, I might as well fail at whatever I want, and
mm,
not tell myself, well, I must write YA because that's what I know how to do. And I thought, thrillers were really huge at the time. I mean, they're still huge now, but there were lots of authors breaking out with thrillers. And I thought, oh, I love, the idea of something very dark and twisty and messy and trying adult. It took me a while to recover from, like I said, the heartbreak of one project not selling, another one, my agent being like, nah. And I thought, well, I'm just gonna try something weird and different for me, like something completely different, and fell at that.
yeah, yeah.
Because at some point, I just felt like that's how I have to look at it. Like, I started working on a book that was from day one called The French Honeymoon. And then in the meantime, I kept, hearing back about Kisses and Croissants. And in early 2019, the book packager finally said, all right, we're ready to go on sub with this. And I thought, oh, it had been so long and I had done so much work and it had any revision I did just kept leading to more revisions. So I think at some point I lost faith that it might actually one day go out to
Yeah, yeah.
editors. And so the way book packages work, they work as the agent, right? So they submit the work to editors the way an agent would do. And we sent it out, and it sold within 5 days in a preempt. Like it was
Wow.
just like the quickest, most insane process, which they are well known for. It doesn't always work that way, but I think because they spend so long polishing a story and working on a very high concept pitch, it just really, the editors kind of open the emails first, you know?
Yeah.
So that was a two-book deal that, you know, kind of changed my life because suddenly I had a book deal in English in the US. It was a lot of money, and I had books to write.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had written 75 pages of Kisses, and I had to finish that book. And when I handed that in, I thought I knew it would take a while for us to figure out book two and what that would look like. And I thought, okay, I have this thriller idea, I have a title for it, I have a concept that I'm interested in, and I started writing it. I had like mostly before then I just, you know, played around with ideas and outlines and writing a synopsis and whatever. I hadn't really dug in. And I started writing The French Honeymoon late 2019. And I kept working on it in and around those two YA novels. So on one hand, I was writing this very sweet YA rom-coms, and on my own time, I was writing, you know, this very dark, messy, twisted thriller.
But that's probably good to have the like separation between the two, that they're very different.
I kind of like it that there is, I feel like anytime I write something lighter, I am, you know, yearning for something darker and vice versa. So I do like to have those two things going at once.
All right, so you're working on the two simultaneously, and then when you finish writing The French Honeymoon, do you give it to your agent, and what is her reaction?
I wrote 100 pages of The French Honeymoon, sent it to my agent, and she hated them so much
Oh
that she
no.
said she couldn't give me notes on them. Basically, I'll talk to you on the phone if you want to, but I don't even think I can write notes on this. And it was one of those things where I thought, am I being extremely sensitive here? Or so I showed the email to my husband, and I'm like, am I clear? Like, are you reading this the same way that she hates them so much she won't write notes? And he's like, yeah, that's what she's saying.
Oh my gosh.
And at that point, I thought, okay, this agent does not like what I write. She loved that book that didn't sell, right? And that happens a lot. She loved that book, it didn't sell. She has not liked anything. I had only sent her two other things, but I'm a firm believer. I was then, and I'm even more now, that when people want to work with you, they tell you. They tell you this isn't working, but let's get on the phone. Let's talk about what you could be writing. Let's talk about this. Let's discuss. I like this and this and this, you know. This is where your career could go. This is whatever. They'll spend the time and the energy working with you if they want to. And if they don't want to, well, it's much better not to have an agent at all than to have someone who just really doesn't like what you write.
Yeah.
It was really hard. I got a new agent. At the time, I was very seriously considering doing an adult rom-com with the same book packager I had been working on with my YA. They put me in touch with a couple of agents they really like working with. And I signed with one saying, hey, you know, I'm working on this thriller. Like, that's really the thing that is, you know, getting me going, basically. And she said, okay. So I signed with a new agent. We worked on multiple things over the course of 2 years. This adult rom-com didn't pan out. She liked a lot of The French Honeymoon, but I didn't really know what to do with it. I wrote a partial for YA thriller that I got very excited about. Didn't, you know, we
Oh my
submitted it. It
gosh.
didn't sell. I was busy writing the second book of my contract, so French Kissing in New York. And I think eventually I felt like as hard as it is to get to that point, the relationship just was becoming strained, you know, like there's only
Yeah.
so many flops you can have together. And by that point, I thought, I don't really know what to do anymore. Like, I just don't really. I thought, I'm going to take a break from writing. I'm no longer have an agent. I had finished French Kissing in New York by my own choice, you know, but I had finished French Kissing in New York, so that was in the production pipeline. And then I thought, I need to take a break. So I did. I took a few months break. I did other things. And it got to a point I was like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to finish. I still have this thriller. It's fully written. A lot of people who've read it didn't like it. Like, I'll be honest with you.
But
Um,
you still liked it.
but I still liked it. And I think I just got to a point where I thought, what am I just going to leave it in a drawer? It's never gone on submission to editors. What am I going to do? Like every time I thought I'm going to try to write something else, I kept thinking about it. And we now in early 2023, and I thought I'm going to try to find a new agent. And worked very, very hard on my query letter. And this is, I'm sure you have a lot of aspiring others listening. So my biggest advice is that query letter is the most, the most important 300 words you will ever write. Like having a very clear pitch. And in the end, my query letter is basically the back cover for the book.
Oh, so that proves that you did a really good job. Yeah.
Yeah, and I, sent it to friends and, I thought, oh, I'm going to finish it in a week, back and forth. And no, I spent 3 or 4 weeks on it, just endlessly getting every word. It's so, so, so important to have people being like, I want to read this, I must read it.
Yes.
And I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to query this book. I'm using no contacts. I'm not asking friends. I'm not doing that at all. Let's see if agents might be interested in this book. And I thought, at least I have done right by this project. I will have, tried all of the things. And then it can die a peaceful, peaceful death in my drawer with the rest of
Yeah.
them. And I got an agent within 2 weeks. I felt very much like I'm going to shoot all of my shots. I went to the biggest agents at all of the biggest agencies, WME, UTA, CAA, I just thought, if I'm going to be rejected, you might as well reject it by the big names.
Yeah.
Plus, by
Yeah.
that point, I really knew that most rejections are silence. Like most rejections are not an actual rejection. You just don't hear back for 6 to 8 weeks and you move on with your life. And it sucks and it's really hard. And that's the only way to get to where you want to go. And so when I started getting requests within 24 hours, I thought, okay. And then more requests. And then, that really, really huge agent at WME had sent it to her colleague who she thought was a better fit for. And I thought, who really wanted to read it. And I thought, wait, hold on, like something is happening here. And so I had a first offer within a couple of weeks, and I then had more offers came in, and I signed with who is now has been my agent for 3 years, and hopefully for many years to come.
I think that there's I mean, and for a good reason, people think this like, oh, I have to have contacts, like I have to get an agent, I need a referral. But in your case, you were like, I want to make sure I get an agent who is signing me because they like the work. At that point, you're like, I want an agent who likes my book, and I am just going to, and so I think a lot of writers find their agent from cold querying, no contacts required, if the agent really feels strongly about the book.
I know plenty of people who just, stayed stuck in a slush pile. It is a huge pile. They get tons and tons and tons of queries, but they do read them. I think the biggest lesson was even the biggest agents at the biggest agencies, it's their assistants, right? Just to be clear, it's not
Right.
them, but it doesn't matter. Their assistants are reading those queries sometimes in real time, not always, but as in like they see something, a title that catches their eye, they start reading the query, they go, that's interesting. And they request the manuscript. They are doing that all day. Agents only have jobs if they have material to sell.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so what was the submission process like for the French honeymoon?
So we did some revisions. It was one of these things where I had rewritten this book so much that my agent was like, what do we try this? What do we try that? I'm like, I've tried this, I've tried this. The plot is complicated enough that I felt like if I pull on this one thread, everything else will collapse. And I did my best. I did my best to do those revisions. I did feel like at some point, this is the book, I don't know what else to do with it. And we sent it out early November and it had sold by mid-December.
Yay.
I've been on sub successfully now 3 times, and each time every project is sold fairly fast by publishing standards. My last one sold in 5 weeks, which is not like crazy short, but it's also shorter than you hear a lot. As long as you think it could take 6 months, a year to get an agent. It can take 3 books to get an agent. That's possible. It can take a year or two to get a book done. That is true. It also can take a couple of weeks. Like
Yeah.
there is no rhyme or reason. This is a creative process. There is no playbook here.
Okay. Well, so just to review, so your two YA Kisses and Croissants and French Kissing in New York, those were like your first English books that came
Yeah,
out in English, but
yeah.
those were through the book packager. They weren't like totally your own ideas. So the first book that was like all you was The French Honeymoon.
Yes.
Yeah, and so how did that feel to like finally get there?
I think it was such a bizarre experience for me because, on one hand, I'm a very experienced writer by this point. I've written many books, published many books, gone through the editing process. My agent, like, like if when we did calls with editors, she said, so if an editor asks if you're open to revisions, you should say yes. I'm like, yeah, yeah, I know. Don't worry. None of this is,
New,
revision
yeah.
process, all of that, none of this is new. And at the same time, exactly as you say, The French Honeymoon is the first book that I published that is mine, that is 100% mine. It's a book that I put in a drawer many times over the course of several years. There were so many times where I just felt like it wasn't going to happen, but we had interest from a few editors and it went to Sourcebox. And my editor wrote to me the loveliest letter you can think of, explaining all the reasons why she loved that book. And it's it's such a subjective process, It is and I thought she just loved it so much she had to have it. It was kind of crazy, honestly.
Yeah.
I say it this way because I just felt like there was so many times where I thought, why do I keep writing on a book that several people have told me is really bad? And now that the book has been out for over a year, the reviews have been mixed. I'm the first one to admit that some people really liked aspects of it. Some people really dislike the characters or the ending or whatever else they want to dislike. But I thought enough people have loved it along the way that it made its way into the world. And I'm very proud of it. I worked extremely hard and it will forever remain my first book,
Yeah, yeah.
And also number 20, but it is my first.
So yeah, so funny. It's like your 20th book, but in some ways it's like your first. So,
Yeah.
oh man. Okay, well so then so it's only been out what you said a little over a year.
Yeah.
And then so that means We Would Never Tell came out pretty quickly after. What was the process like for that?
Yeah, it came out exactly a year after. So while we were on top with the French honeymoon, I started working on another thriller. I didn't really tell my agent about it because it was more like, okay, when the French honeymoon doesn't sell, like when I'm getting myself ready for a huge disappointment, I wanted to be far enough into something else. And I wrote about like 40 plus thousand words, so about half a novel. And when my editor said, "Okay, we want to give you a two-book deal, what idea do you have?" Well, no, yeah, on a call she said, "Do you have an idea for another thriller?" And I gave her the idea, and she's like, "Okay, sounds interesting." And then she offered a two-book deal. So I put together. She wanted to approve an outline, so I wrote the outline, synopsis, all of the things. Sent my agent first a very detailed proposal, and in it, I said to my agent. I don't want to write books that are just set in France. Like that is not my goal. But I have this idea for this sort of heist murder mystery set at the Cannes Film Festival. But I was pitched, like, I had written a 15-page proposal for the book I was currently writing. And my agent said, "Ooh, what do you think about writing the Cannes Film Festival one?" And I thought, okay, I'm like halfway through something completely different. But I think the reason I mentioned it to her is I felt like that idea had commercial potential. I was scared to write it because I wanted it to be a lot of, you've read it, right? Like a lot of different POVs, a lot of different narrative formats. It sounded very ambitious as a project. I had worked so hard on the French honeymoon and felt like, am I setting myself up for a crazy amount of work by trying something, with all these different POVs? But I trusted my agent and I said, okay, well, let me write an outline for that Cannes Film Festival book. And at the time it was called Champagne Problems. And we sent that to my editor instead. And she's like, what happened to the toxic relationship thriller? And we were like, ah,
Maybe later.
never mind. And she was like, let's do it. When writing on a contract is different, right? Like you have a deadline. The deadline is not always clear. They had a pub date for it that I didn't know really, but I knew it had to be, soon. So I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. I think I found it easier to have my editor like greenlighting the idea. I had a deadline. Yeah, wrote it in the space of about 10 months, I want to say,
Wow.
with a lot of interruptions, but and then did a lot of revisions for last year, I guess. And yeah, it came out. Well, we're recording this in late May, so it came out 6 weeks ago, roughly. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, what a great story. All of it. The whole the
I
whole
know it's a
saga.
start. I warn you, but I feel like I know we've been talking a while, but it's
Yeah, yeah. But we had to get it all in. Well, yeah, so we have been talking about, so I know I need to wrap it up. So I do always ask people, what is something that has surprised you about this whole process, the writing or the publishing, or and it can be a good surprise or a not so good surprise or one of each.
I mean, it's hard to pick just one. I will say, I think the surprise is there has not been a moment where I felt like I got this. I know the facts. I've just, spent an hour telling you all the facts that I picked myself up off the floor from every failure that I kept writing, even when I thought, I was very upset and disappointed and sad and all of the things, and I eventually kept at it. But there has not been a moment where I'm like, I'm good, I'm sad. We would never tell was fairly a smooth writing process. I just had an outline and I stuck to it pretty closely and I kept writing it. And I thought, oh, okay, well, now I know how to write a book. And then I got the idea for my third thriller and I thought, oh, I don't know how to write a book. Like, I still have no clue whatsoever.
It keeps you on your toes always.
It does.
Yeah.
And the only knowledge I have is that I will do it because, history shows me that I will. But I don't know
Yeah.
how.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, I end every episode with a tip for the road for our listeners, and it can be a tip about writing or publishing or anything else that you want to impart.
Where to start. But I think I will say nobody knows what they're doing. We all just throwing ideas onto the page. We're all just trying some things. I think it's very easy when you see a book do extremely well to sort of reverse engineer it and be like, oh, of course they had such a great commercial idea. They had this. No, they just tried something. Most likely, you know what? The author just tried something and it worked extremely well. And they wrote a great book, and then they found the right editor and the right agent and the right moment, and that book really took off. And so many things could have changed the course of that. We just all are trying things.
Yeah, and what we don't see, and what I think is so fun about this podcast is we don't see all the things they tried before that
Yes.
didn't work,
Yeah,
didn't go anywhere, and that's all in there too, you know.
exactly. And then I like to think of like we just fell forward, like the only way you can fail is if you keep going. If you can't get rejected by agents if you don't submit your book.
Yeah,
You just can't. You can't submit a book if you don't write it. So the only way to fail at this is to actually do the work. There's no code to crack, just write something that you're excited to write about. It may work amazingly. You just really none of us know.
yeah,
That
yeah,
that's I don't know if that's very uplifting, but that's kind of that what gets me through the day,
yeah.
like I'm just trying something, we'll see.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And then it's like, I think sometimes, especially new writers, they want to know, like, if I do this, will I have success? And it's like there's no way to know except to try. There's literally no way to know.
There's no
So,
way to know, and you could write, and then, as I've said, like you could write this book and you submit it this month and it will not sell, and 3 months from now, another book similar to it has done well, and there is no way to know
yeah,
the other path we could have taken, I
yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Try to find comfort in the uncertainty because that is all we have.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I hope that people go and find The French Honeymoon and We Would Never Tell. I haven't read The French Honeymoon, so now I'm like, ooh, I gotta read it and see what all the chatter is about.
Well, yeah, yeah, don't tell me if you don't like it.
Yeah. But well, yeah, thank you so
Thank you
much for
so
being
much for
here.
having me.
Thanks for listening to The Long Road to Publishing. Many of the books we discuss on the podcast can be found at my bookshop shop, the link for which is in the show notes. My guests' books and many of the resources we discuss on the show can also be found in the show notes. You can find me online on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Substack with the handle Eva Langston. Even better, subscribe to my free newsletter for writers at evalangston.substack.com and feel free to send me an email. The podcast address is longroad.pub@gmail.com. The Long Road to Publishing is produced and edited by me, Eva Langston, and the intro-outro music comes from the artist's sound roll on Upbeat. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and I'll be back soon with more publishing stories and more tips for the road.